So this is Sean Blackwell, and I'm Oz Thomas, finding Sean's work and just really resonating with this kind of more spiritual look at bipolar. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you found your way to YouTube?
So then how did my experience lead to my doing YouTube videos? Was that, for many years I was looking for my spiritual calling and I really couldn't find it. I seem to be getting closer, a lot of traveling, trips to Brazil where I met my Brazilian wife, and now I live in Brazil. I changed my career and all that was great. But still that thing was missing. And then in 2007, one of my Brazilian nieces here had an experience which seemed very, very similar to my own. And we actually helped her work through that experience. But in the end, what happened was she was labeled with bipolar disorder. And her similarities were so similar to mine that I started going online onto the internet to investigate the difference between the spiritual emergency that I had and this thing called bipolar disorder. And that's really how I started my videos. I started my videos telling my story with the title, Am I Bipolar or Waking Up? Because my experience was clearly one where I felt I had woken up, but the similarities and symptoms of bipolar disorder were so close I couldn't tell. Why? And then I also found out that these people with bipolar disorder, most of them were being medicated for life. But once I realized that the experiences were basically the same and that it's largely a matter of how you treat people in these crisis situations that determines whether they're going to heal or not, I figured that out after enough research. And then I just started putting all the work I could from specifically Dr. Stan Grof into the YouTube videos, and people from around the world really started to connect with the messages that I had there. They could see in Dr. Grof's work everything that they were going through that they were not allowed to share with their psychiatrist, and that because their psychiatrist would always treat as signs of mental illness, so largely they kept their mouth shut about it. And the response has been pretty strong. It's been pretty strong. I've almost got 5,000 subscribers at this point, and that's a sign of a pretty strong YouTube channel.
I agree. One of the things that really connected me and that really resonated with me about your videos and your work was the fact that maybe what you were going through was a little bit extreme, but in a lot of ways there are things that everybody goes through. Everybody in some form or another goes through anxiety, maybe like some minor psychosis, some weird things that maybe people don't want to admit to. But it's the fact that we all kind of have this struggle, and we all have a lot more going on as human beings than, just chemicals. As I've evolved, and I feel like you've evolved in the same way, as seeing that, we do have medications for certain reasons. But would you like to talk about maybe what you feel are the limitations of the current system?
Well, I think there's enough on the internet related to anti-psychiatry, especially led by the Scientologists. They're really strong with that. And I want people to know out there that I'm not a Scientologist. I don't have any religion, but I feel like I do have a deeply spiritual life. But the model, it gives you one option. It gives you the option of medication. It doesn't explore what's beneath the surface, what's causing these crises in people. And like you said, Oz, the crises that are happening to people are not so much different than what people in their normal daily lives have to go through, like the so-called normal people. It's just a matter of degree, And it's my own personal opinion that you could pretty much take anybody, and if you put enough on their plate, they can have a sort of acute psychosis. For some people, it would need to be extreme circumstances. For other people, less so. But I really think it could happen to almost anybody. At the same time, the first niece that I talked about, she remains medicated. And I'm not so sure that the path of the spiritual emergency would have been the best path for her. She was a lot younger than I was. I don't know if she was psychologically prepared to work through the difficulties that others might. But what happened, just continuing my story a little bit, was that 4 months after my first niece had her crisis, her second niece, who was a little bit older, a little bit more sophisticated, she went into a crisis. I thought I was in a movie. Two nieces have their first acute psychosis within 4 months of each other. It was just unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. I thought my experience was one in maybe 10,000. I thought, well, maybe there's somebody else having a spiritual experience, in India at the same time I am, something like that. But now I've got two nieces going through these crises in the same year, the same summer. And with the second older niece, Eliana, I talk about her as well in the book. She came to us directly. She didn't have any contact with psychiatry for her first acute psychosis. And it took a few episodes, but we were eventually able to get her through, working her through the process in the same way that I'd studied with Dr. Stan Grof's book. We really just adopted his model and went at it in that direction, supported her, protected her the whole time, didn't even call her parents until after the crisis had really come to an end, and then let her go back home. It took a number of crises for her to heal. But in the total, I mean, that first episode of hers was in 2007. In the whole process, she had like 2 weeks of medication, and that's it. And she doesn't see any doctors now at all, and she's doing really great. So I've got two nieces, one who's been medicated, and I see the value in that. I think maybe, as much as I wanted to heal her or help her heal, I think that maybe psychiatry was the right thing for her, at least in that moment. And then we've got our other niece who we're able to bring through with flying colors, really. And so I really do think that you need psychiatry, especially depending on certain symptoms that people have, and certainly for short periods of time, maybe not long, lifetimes. But then I really do think that there's other people that can heal without any medications or maybe very minimal medications. And we really don't provide clinics for these people. We don't provide support. We don't provide any intellectual understanding for them to understand the condition. And so I've just sort of taken that on my shoulders and gone on YouTube just to make as much noise about this as possible.
Oh, awesome. So, I feel like that's a great answer. I mean, just, trying to look at the situation and not applying, the same thing, the same treatment, across the board. It really has to do with what they need, and maybe medication as something to help people stay safe. I mean,
yeah, and can I just jump in? There's a few things that have happened. In the beginning, once I started to, I knew nothing about psychiatry, and I thought, well, people who are mentally ill need medications, and that's it. But then when I got online and found out about the symptoms that people have, and how it can really deteriorate the quality of your life, and that people are never given a chance to heal, I really got angry, especially when so many of these people with bipolar disorder had experiences close to mine. And, I made a video called Rage Against Psychiatry, and
I remember that one.
Yeah, and I eventually pulled it because even though my end line was, find your spirit, lose your meds, I realized that people were really taking away from this lose your meds, and they didn't know what find your spirit meant. And so I took that video down. And as time went by and I did more research, I realized that, there's some people out there. There's been a few murders happen while people have been in acute psychosis. One was a widely publicized murder down here in Brazil, and I knew about one that happened up in Alaska. So, you've got to take this stuff seriously. You've really got, like you said, you got to pay attention to who you're working with. And I think my videos have really worked hard to give people a really good idea about who has a higher probability of healing and who would probably benefit most from remaining on medications, and then maybe who's in the middle, who you might want to take a bigger risk with depending on the circumstances.
So as far as psychiatry goes, and maybe the limitations of medications, what do you feel is the place for maybe alternative therapies?
Well, once you've got a person who's been in an acute psychosis, this is, for most people, a period of insanity. This is what they're looking at as insanity, and that's really what my videos are about. And what I found, and this is in the work of Dr. Grof, which is from transpersonal psychology, is that the roots of this problem are happening on the spiritual level of our being. And that's not something that's recognized by psychiatry or psychology. And it's something that, for the large part, to a large extent, we don't know how to work with in mainstream society. And in truth, we don't really work with it. What we do is we support what it wants to do. Dr. Groff says that we have an inner healer inside of us, and that's what needs to be trusted. And that's a really far out idea, but I can tell you that from personal experience, that's what needs to happen. We didn't just work with our nieces. We continued to work with a few other people. It was a remarkable short period of time. In like a year and a half, I helped people through 9 episodes of acute psychosis, and then the phone stopped ringing. I don't know why, but it just stopped ringing. But there was I guess 5 or 6 people that we worked with through different periods of psychosis, a few very short and powerful, others longer. We had one guy in here in my apartment for a week working through mild experiences. But for the most part, what needs to happen is you need to simply surrender to this experience and protect the person who's in it. I mean, I was working with people here on the 13th floor of my apartment, and I'll tell you, that is a terrible idea. But we didn't have another option. You got to work with people in a safe environment, ground floor, keep the knives away. You don't really know what's going to happen, but you need to have 2 people there to support them, and just trust that whatever's going to happen is for their benefit, as long as they're prepared to work with you and connect with you and relate to you. If they start to turn on you, blaming you, you're the reason this is happening, stop doing this to me, why is this happening to me, rejecting the experience, I want to talk to my friends, I want to be on the computer, these kind of things, that's a sign of a person who's really not healing. That's somebody who's rejecting the inner process. And my feeling is that, okay, you can try and work with a person like that for maybe a few hours, but eventually, if someone's like that, they've got to be taken to the psychiatric hospital. You can't really work with them. And so how this ties in with the meditation, the sort of wellness and other therapeutic techniques, I think that the person who's going through the process really needs to trust what's good for them. And so that if you're at a place where, okay, suppose you've been taking a little bit of medication to get stabilized, and you say to yourself, hey, you know what, maybe this cognitive therapy is a good idea, and your intuition is sort of leading you to cognitive therapy or leading you to acupuncture or leading you to clean up your diet, then that's what you should do. But from what I've seen so far, the only real psychological theory that makes sense of what people are going through is from Dr. Stan Grof, transpersonal psychology. There's a few other doctors that are really strong in that area too. Dr. David Lukoff is doing more on the internet related to spiritual emergency than anybody right now. And he had one. That's why he's fighting so hard for this as well. He had one back in 1972. And the now past deceased John Weir Perry had a clinic open for 5 years using a similar technique. But they all follow the transpersonal model. And this is hard for people because right now we're sort of in a world of diversity where, oh, well, your approach is okay, but there's this other approach, and who can say what's right and what's wrong? But, as far as spiritual things go, the Dalai Lama's brother is bipolar. He's on antidepressants. Or he's not on antidepressants, he's on lithium. I know a very famous shaman in the Southwest United States whose brother is medicated with schizophrenia. Just because you're a spiritual person doesn't mean you know what you're doing in this area. You need to have the guidance, and Grof is the pioneer.
Cool.
Okay?
Cool. Well, yeah. I feel like, a lot of what you're talking about is, a pretty major shift in the current paradigm. And from what I've seen, I mean, I feel like I see some good signs because I feel like from my speaking with psychiatrists that, they are kind of more open-minded, that about, maybe the limitations of medications than they were even 10 years ago. And I feel like, the peer support movement, the importance of community has really strengthened and really gotten a lot bigger, in the past 10 years. Mm-hmm. But I'm not really sure, like you kind of mentioned that there's still kind of this nebulous area where, there's no real major overarching kind of, theory, guiding everything.
Yeah. I think that's the thing that's holding back the movement is they've got no theory. The peer support, right. The soteria, it's the one weakness that they have, and they're great with the emotional support, but there's no theory. There's no, someone goes into a birth regression, they've rolled up on the floor, and they start sucking their thumb, And it's like, wow, I wonder what they're doing. You know, people don't know what's happening, and they don't understand the significance of it.
I mean, what do you think it would take for like this shift to take place? I mean, I know that you're working with psychologists or psychiatrists in Brazil.
Yeah, we go to a meeting at the biggest hospital in Latin America once a week, and we talk about these things. And last year, it just felt like the doors opened for us. We did, I think, 5 or 6 presentations there. We introduced people to Groff's work. We helped introduce another important thinker in this area related to consciousness. We've helped introduce Ken Wilber's work into the hospital, and their attitude is real diversity. You know, they're taking in other opinions, and this is, diversity is what it's all about. It's a postmodern movement, and they're really receptive and really open, but they're not ready to really cut their teeth. They're not really to take that step and say, okay, let's do this. Let's open an alternative clinic. Let's work people through these episodes. They're not there yet. But we're working on it. You know, we're getting closer.
Do you think they need like more kind of case studies and more examples, I guess, or?
Well, there's an amazing book that came out this year with arguing for a greater representation of religious and spiritual experiences in the DSM-5, which is the big book of mental illness. Now they work with DSM-4 revised version.
Right.
They've put this big book together with 38 different psychiatrists and psychologists who've done very good research on the relationship between spiritual religious experiences and mental disorders. And this came out in 2011. And David Lukoff has a chapter in there related to spiritual emergency. So he's sort of brought back Groff's work and his own work as well. He was the first one to get spiritual and religious problems recognized in the DSM-4. And they really worked hard. And now we've got like 38 doctors there with this book. And it's really hard for psychiatrists to turn a blind eye to this whole movement now, because there's really strong research, really good, patient, refined research being done in the field now that's opening some eyes. And this is one of the limitations with Groff's work, was he was working at a time in the 80s when he was so far out of the mainstream. I mean, he wasn't even in the same world. He was working on Mars compared to regular psychiatrists. And so he didn't do published research, basically because nobody would publish him except the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology. So if you Google Groff research, you don't find much. But Lukoff and these others have worked to really, get into these respected publications that all psychiatrists read, and people are listening. People are listening. Now, they're not listening to me, but because I don't have any credentials. But when I go in, or when my wife Leisha goes in, and we do a presentation on Dr. Lukoff's work, or summarize a presentation on Ken Wilber's work, people are listening.
Oh, it's really good to hear.
More. This is the big thing.
Yeah.
In the past, it was all about science and the facts and everything. Now everything's got to be diversity, diverse opinions. This is a movement from modern to postmodern consciousness, which Wilber talks about. But
well,
go ahead.
Yeah. No, I feel what you're saying. I mean, because I see it even in, I read a lot of, the Journal of Nature, and, I'm seeing a lot of really diverse opinions, but it's all still very much based on science and based on, studies and, based on things that have been proven as facts. I mean, I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's sort of a middle ground between maybe the right and left hemispheres of the brain. And I feel like this kind of leads into maybe your theory as well. When you're talking about spirituality, usually I feel like it's something that is so nebulous and hard to define. And when you're talking about the mind and the brain, it's like, it's almost like this area that is almost like sacrosanct. It's like sacred. But there are like, a lot of common experiences that we all have, common doorways that we pass through, thinking of, the spiral dynamics levels. Do you want to talk a little bit about maybe
the spiral dynamics thing?
Yeah, spiral dynamics. And
well, I can say I'll be honest, it's not the most popular part of my work, okay? Because I've got this big chunk which is dedicated to people's experience in acute psychosis. That's Groff's side, and people just look at that stuff and go, wow, everything here happened to me. This is amazing. But then I introduce Ken Wilber's work on consciousness because it's my belief based on all the people I've talked to. I've talked to over 1,000 people about their stories over 4 years. And in my own personal experience with my nieces, what I see is that as Wilber has described consciousness, people who are at higher levels of consciousness, which are levels which are more open-minded, very diverse-oriented, like people who are into diversity and this kind of thing, these people have much more loving, positive experiences in psychosis. The oneness, the knowingness, the connectedness, and all that kind of thing tends to happen with people with this sort of postmodern mind. Other people who have quite positive experiences are former atheists, people who used to be atheists, but because of their experience are no longer atheists. They tend to be quite confused, but their experiences are usually quite good, and some of those people heal as well with not that much support. And I was really in that postmodern mind, that diversity mind, when my experience happened. So I feel like that mind is psychologically prepared for what happens to you. But I also noticed that when people would start talking to me about violence and wanting to kill people and the devils that were chasing them and all this stuff, once I got deeper into their stories, I could see that a lot of them have been highly traumatized. People have been abused since childhood, really, really rough beginnings, and also quite poorly educated. Like I would get like one page with no paragraph and no punctuation and no organization of thoughts, just one big rambling phrase from some kinds of people with bad spelling, terrible spelling. And it became quite obvious to me that the people who were having very difficult experiences of acute psychosis, violent experiences, and this kind of thing, had really had hard lives, and in a sense represented the part of consciousness that wasn't quite as developed. We're talking about people who, at best, were still thinking like teenagers, or maybe the the troublemaker in the class, the high school troublemaker, except with people who are adults as well, And this is the most controversial side of spiral dynamics, is that there's these higher level consciousness people and lower level consciousness people, and there's this range in between. And a lot of people don't like to hear that. A lot of people want to think these days that everybody's equal. And so that's an obstacle, and it just needs to be recognized that, with this hierarchy, it's not a ethnic hierarchy or a social class hierarchy. It's a natural development that's happening within you that largely follows a system that most people are comfortable with, or most spiritual people are comfortable with, which is the chakra system. It seems that our energy systems are opening up. I don't want to say sequentially entirely, but in the general direction of the chakras, where people with more disturbing experiences do seem to have more energetic problems in the lower chakra areas. My experience was heart chakra, and since then I've had other experiences at higher chakra levels. And so it's something that's within all of us, and it's part of everyone's spiritual development. And so I really don't think that people should criticize Wilber for being elitist, because he recognizes that this development is within everybody, and that we need to support the spiritual development in the same way that we would support somebody moving from grade school to high school to university. I mean, we're never going to tell somebody, oh, stop in grade school, that's enough. No, we're going to encourage them to go as far as they can, Does that answer the question?
I think so, and I think you touched on a really good point about the spiral dynamics being, it is a kind of hierarchical system, but it's not, the same kind of hierarchical system as, say, like a caste system.
And in my opinion, it's in a way a better way to look at the world than diversity, because it allows you to have compassion for people that are not as sophisticated as you are. Like the mind that takes in diversity is quite a sophisticated mind. And when they look at, like, for example, the devoutly religious person, it's very easy for them to say, oh, you're a racist, you're a bigot, because you think that if people don't follow your religion, then they're going to hell, and that's just a terrible thing to say to people, and you're homophobic. And diversity has a dark side to it. and it tends to be quite judgmental of people who are not really there yet. They just haven't developed there yet. And the integral consciousness that Wilber talks about it recognizes that, okay, certain people are not ready for more sophisticated ways of thinking or more sophisticated values, and that we can just help them along. Like, recognize where they are, don't judge them, just help them along.
Cool. Is there anything I've kind of I think touched on most of the questions I've had. Is there anything
Wow,
else that you
really?
really wanted to? Yeah, and is there anything you feel like you really wanted to talk about, or?
I had this amazing artist for this book. His name was Oz Thomas. He happens to be the guy doing the interview. And he did the front cover and the back cover. And we worked together on that really hard. And I think
For many years.
for many months, yeah. And but I mean, just with that, we spent 5 months on the cover, and that shows how much energy we put into the book. Because Oz, you talked about it in the beginning, a shift in paradigm. We need a paradigm shift. We need something that's going to break through. And so I wrote this book from a deeply personal position. I didn't want to talk theory in my first book because people can always argue theory. But I wanted to take people down my road, show them the world through my eyes, and let people who even haven't had a psychosis or a spiritual emergency, look at my life and how I've seen the world and the happiness that I've found. Because, I'm not the Dalai Lama. I'm not like this sort of, I'm in world peace guru kind of guy. But my life is a lot better than it used to be. Living is a lot more fun. I've had a few rough years lately, but I see the process. I see that it's things that I've needed to go through. And I've got a much more, I think, a resilient spirit than I ever had, like in my 20s, and I'm 45 now, and I've got no regrets. And when you read my book, you might think, wow, this guy is crazy, because once I came out of the psychiatric hospital, my life I lived in 5 different cities in 5 years. I was in Peru because I followed a dream. I mean, I was really all over the place, and I didn't know why. But it's been quite a journey, and I think that even for someone's very conservative mom and dad, if they're going to read this book, they're going to be entertained. It's going to be a book like they've never read before, and it's going to come at this process of bipolar disorder, mental disorders, with a completely different vision. And that's, I think, what's needed in the mainstream is a completely different vision, just to wake people up and go, wow, there's another way of looking at this.
Yeah, I lent my copy to a friend who was diagnosed bipolar, and she just read, the first half of the first page, and she was like, "Oh, I'm reading the whole thing." She was like instantly hooked.
Yeah.
So,
and maybe the last thing is that I've had a lot of people say to me, "Sean, I read your book in one night."
yeah.
And that's really what I was going after. I wanted something that people wouldn't be able to put down. She couldn't put it down, and so it's really tight. I spent 2 years editing. The first year was the writing, and then 2 years editing. And
I think it really shows. Yeah.
I really wanted to grab people, and so it'll hopefully grab your mom and dad too. If you don't mind thinking about grabbing your mom. But am I bipolar? Waking up. Sean Blackwell. I don't know if you see down there, Sean Blackwell. And
Awesome.
my YouTube channel is Bipolar or Waking Up. And watch my videos. I used to be in advertising, and that really helped me put these videos together. I'm pretty good at communicating.
And you have a Ning page?
Yeah, I've got a social network, Wake the Planet. But start with the videos and see if it's your thing. I don't want to force my ideas onto people. They're there. It's different. If you like it, great. Join us at Wake the Planet. If it helps, great. If you hate me, if you think I'm doing something dangerous, I've heard it all before. I've heard it before, and I understand your position, but something's got to be done, because on the one side, we've got this dangerous aspect, which is true. I'm not denying it. But on the other side, we've got, millions of people who are being medicated for most of their adult lives. And in my opinion, they don't need to be. We just need to come at this from a different perspective. Right?
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to your theory book.
Yeah. If I sell this one, maybe I'll get to the next one,
But I hope so. I mean, I think it would be, I think it'd be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to writing it after after I get some rest, I really want to write that book. I think it could be fun and a different psychology book like no other.
Yeah.
And okay, yeah. Anything else?
I think we're cool. Just thanks so much for this interview.
Great. Great.
Yeah.
Thanks.